So, Donald, tell me a little bit about what you do. I know you have a book out, so explain a little bit about what you do because I'm really curious about it. I know my listeners are too.
Well, I have to say, in terms of qualifications, I can't say I'm a sociologist or a social scientist. I think the best way to describe myself is just a thoughtful, hopefully, citizen who has gotten a little bit tired of the pundits on either side talking about the issues that affect us so much, but really not getting to the heart of it. And I kind of believe that there's this group, the middle majority, who wants to do the right thing, and they're not really associated with either side. And I was just trying to give a voice to that middle majority. Sorry.
Mm, Nice. And how did you get into this? Because I saw that you have your book and I just
Yeah.
ordered it. I'm excited about it. And so tell me a little bit about how you got into this, all these issues and stuff, because they're very important issues, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But
Yeah. Well, I think just like all of us, we're faced with these issues all the time. Whether you're at work or you're in school, people like to think of ourselves as aspiring to be, race blind. I guess the term. But yet we are always drawn to the issue and made to think of it, whether it's, the controversy of DEI, or whether it's, having to fill out forms as a job applicant or, job applications. We are constantly confronted with the issue of race in the United States and what we're sort of doing about it. And there's this feeling, I believe, that progress was being made and that we were sort of on a path to a more multiracial society, but it plateaued and seemed to sort of, I think both sides have seen dissatisfaction in the last 10 years about where things are going. And if you even look at national polls, it shows that people are generally pessimistic about our progress in that area. And I think it kind of goes back to, again, in my mind, people not taking sort of a person in the street approach. And we sort of, I think, wrongly take approaches on both the conservative and liberal side that are not helping us make the progress that we need to make.
and what do you think we need to do to make the progress, in your opinion?
Well, to me, it gets down to root causes. So let me give you maybe a slightly tortured analogy, but it's like, if you had a piece of land that was abandoned industrial land, you said you wanted to turn that into farmland. What do you have to do? And there's like the clearing of the space, like take that old buildings and the refuse and the things that have been left on the property, and you sort of clear it away, and you have this nice open space. And now, what do you do with that nice open space? Well, uh, unfortunately, there's maybe toxic things in the ground, and so you have to deal with that. But I think, just to go back to where I think both sides are getting it wrong, I think conservatives look at it and go, "What's the problem? It's a big open space. Like turn it into a farm. We're good. Like, we got rid of all the trash." And they're wrong because they don't see that the harder job maybe is getting the toxins out of the ground that the land was on. The liberals look at it, they say, "Oh, we want it turned into a farm, so we'll create a subsidy for people who buy stuff from this farmland." Well, that doesn't address the issue either. So yeah, I think both these sides looking at how do you make this land into something productive, and both of them are kind of coming up, in my opinion, with the wrong answer. So that's a little bit of a metaphor for it. Um, but I think a case to make the metaphor more real is look at the case of affirmative action, which has been in the news because it's been the court cases. And I think that is where that metaphor comes to life, because um, it is the argument about whether there should be affirmative action or not. And there's like both sides are fighting about it. And it's really, that's not what the fight should be about. It's almost a pointless fight, because if you look at the real issue and the real root cause for lack of equality and advanced education in the United States, it doesn't have to do with acceptance rates. It has to do with completion rates. So the acceptance rates have been going up for minority applicants, but there's been this stubborn problem with them actually going through and graduating. There's a lot of reasons for that, but what it basically comes from is you have people who are put in a college situation who are not as ready to succeed. And that in turn goes to a deeper issue about schools and how our schools are funded. 50% of the funding from states for public schools come from property tax. So what does that mean? It means you're in a wealthy area, you're going to be um, paying more per student than you are in a low income area, whereas the needs are reversed. Like someone in a low income area generally needs more help, not less. So solving the problem of affirmative action, like doesn't matter if you force schools to accept more or less, you're not addressing the root cause. So that's an example, I think, again, where both sides are sort of wrong. So the conservatives look at it and say, hey, there's no issue here. Let's move on. The liberals look at it and say, oh, let's keep, forcing admissions. The real issue is how do you prepare and create more opportunity for kids who want to go to college who are in low income and underserved educational communities.
That's what I was always curious about because affirmative action's been around since I was in college 25 years ago. But yeah, yeah. So now that you know how old I am, but the thing that always made me curious is how do they decide who gets it? Is it just a race thing? Is it race based on grades, or is it a combination thereof? How does that work?
Yeah, well, that's a big debate that's going on. So um, the colleges, in support of affirmative action, were saying that they take more than grades into account. They're trying to build not just a great academic institution. They're trying to build these communities. So they take a lot of things into account. They take account whether you're a musician or what part of the country you're from, because they want to create this sort of rich community of people that bring different skills and different backgrounds. And they say, and race is part of that. That we want to create that as part of the mesh of our community, and therefore we support having race as a factor. So in that instance, colleges, look, all other things being equal, would say, hey, we would bring in a minority candidate as opposed to a non-minority candidate if it made for what they would say would be a richer community. But you turn around and look at the right on that, and they say, well, by taking race into account, you're being unfair. That's not something you should take into account in the same way, and it becomes almost a reverse discrimination case. So there's the arguments that going on both sides. But if you look at again the facts of the matter, like people like look at symbols, and for better or worse, they often look at the Ivy League schools and use that as an example of whether we're giving opportunities to everybody in the U.S. And if you look at the admittance rates in Ivy League schools, minorities are actually overrepresented in terms of the percent of the population. Um, so on things like that, again, the issue isn't admittance. The issue is once they get in, do they have the background? Do they have the preparation to actually get through? And there's just a lot more issues that minorities seem to face. One being from a low-income household. Another thing is less likely to come from college-educated household. And one of the biggest predictors of whether you go to college is to see to college is whether your parents went to college. So a lot of times our first-time college goers, again, a lot of issues, but have nothing to do with what percentage you accept. It has to do with having people who are prepared to be in college. It's like saying someone with perfect pitch in music and expecting them, okay, because you have perfect pitch, we're going to put you in the symphony. Like, well, yeah, you might be extremely talented and you may have this innate musical ability, but you haven't been trained in how to play a violin, gone through instruction, you're not going to succeed. And that's the same thing that happens to a lot of people who are, in these um, college situations who don't have the sort of the right background. So again, that's the root cause. The root cause is, not colleges not being willing or not being able or not trying to create diverse communities. It comes from the fact that there's other factors that make them less likely to successfully complete college.
I didn't think about it that way. I heard about affirmative action, of course, growing up and now that it's in the news, but I never thought of, the way you put it. It's a very interesting way of talking about the topic that I've actually never heard before. And I am a political and news junkie and watch both sides of the thing. And this is the first time I heard it where it's very fair the way you put it. It's a very interesting. So thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, well, thank you for that comment. Another way to think about it, or the way I think about it, it's sometimes an economic background. It's like mistaking a supply problem for a demand problem, in economics. So again, this, it pox on both sides, but going back at the liberals now, they assume everything's a demand problem. It's like, okay, the problem is, the colleges aren't seeking out qualified minority candidates. It's like, no, it's a supply problem. The problem is, getting kids who are college ready at that point. So it's solving the wrong problem. And I just use that as an example because it's what's in the news, but the same thing is true in a lot of our policies. So government set asides for contracts, and if you're familiar with those, it's saying if there's a big public works project, that they must have a certain amount of minority-owned companies working on it. Again, probably constructed with good intent, but it's the exact same thing. It's assuming it's a demand problem, and it's not. It's a supply problem. It's like there aren't minority companies that out there that have had sort of the capital to start new businesses. There's generally, in minority communities, less capital has been accumulated over their lifetimes. There's less family net worth to call on to get business loans and start new businesses. So that's really the issue. The issue isn't, again, demand. Like, okay, there's not enough people asking for minority companies. The issue is there are not enough minority companies out there. And the issue to solve that is requiring set asides. The answer to that is how do you make capital available to people who want to start new businesses, who may be coming from disadvantaged circumstances. So the pattern plays out again and again. We keep solving the wrong problem, and that's why we kind of brought this up, especially as naturally Martin Luther King Day makes us look at how we're making progress or not making progress. We're in the tougher part now. We're in the part where we have to look at these causes a little bit more deeply, and we just haven't been doing them in a way that solves the real problem that we need to be solving.
And what do you think we need to do to make this? And I actually do want to get into the Martin Luther King thing in just a moment because it does fall on a day where our new president's being inaugurated. I want to mention that. I want to talk about that in just a moment. But
Yeah.
if you were in charge and Donald Blair was in charge, what he would he do to make this all better? Or I don't want that better's not a good word, but different and
Well, to put us on the right path. And I think to put us on the right path is, again, like, let's look at the root causes. The problem is not, like I said, it's not a demand problem, all these things, it's a supply problem. So how do you sort of address that? And if you look at the things that really succeeded for the country, the things that really set us on a track, you look at things like going back historically, um, the GI Bill, coming out of World War II, uh, made both education and home ownership more accessible to working class and middle class service people coming out of service in the war, and that was done to do. And it created home ownership that really drove the economy and boomed in the 50s a lot because it gave these people access to build some net worth for themselves by buying a home. We have Eisenhower, the interstate highway program was a big program, but really made our infrastructure stronger and enabled easier connection of goods and services. So it takes some sort of big thinking. And we need to apply, I think, that same sort of big thinking to the root causes. Like, we can't be looking for, like, oh, let's keep looking for the first person to do this and the first person to do that. I mean, those symbols are sort of fun to celebrate. The first, minority in outer space, or the first, president of CEO who's, from a different background and things like that. But they don't really move the needle. What moves the needles is these really things that address the root cause. And going back to those same root causes, sadly, if you look at the GI Bill, it did discriminate against minorities. It wasn't as easy for them to take advantage of the GI Bill as it was for the majority. Those are the types of things that get us on the right track. Looking at these problems, one, for root causes, and what's really going to move the needle. Not for symbolic gestures and sort of opening up these new symbols of progress, but actually creating progress for millions of people. And we have to think, I think, a little bit bigger to do that.
And then you just brought up Martin Luther King, and of course we know on Monday Martin Luther King Day is happening, and same day as the inauguration. So tell me a little bit about you were starting to say your feelings about that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I call it like it's like civil rights 1.0 and civil rights 2.0. I think it causes a little bit of reflection. And I associate civil rights 1.0 with the 60s and the civil rights movement there. Um, a huge turning point for our country, right? If you look at just attitudes towards racial justice going into the 60s and coming out of the 60s, it really transformed the United States' view of what was the path that we should be on. The thing, going into the 60s, school segregation was the law of the land in many places. Interracial marriage wasn't ruled unconstitutional until 1967. So it was just the average person, and even and the average person also being a lot of times the average white person, but just thought these things were, it was okay, and that was all right. If you took the same look at that same sort of group of people in the early '70s, the attitudes had totally transformed, and there was a lot of progress made in the sort of the easiest problems. So, again, kind of going back to my analogy about the abandoned land, so the big, unsightly things could be removed, and they were. So there were constitutional things were ruled unconstitutional in terms of the school segregation, in terms of interracial reaction, all those things, and we made tremendous progress. But um, we still had these larger sort of systematic problems. So whether it was redlining for mortgages, so it was harder for minorities to get their homes financed, even with the same financial backgrounds, all these sort of things, which sort of deeper, they eventually caught up with us. And so, in a way, I hate to say civil rights 1.0 is the easy part, because it definitely wasn't easy. And, there's a lot of turmoil, and a lot of people, went through some very hard times and even gave their lives in that effort. And so I don't want to call that easy, but in some ways it was easier than the thing we're in now. So, well, how do you look at the deeper things that, are rooted underneath the ground that may be holding us back now? And I think that's what we need to do. And so I think Martin Luther King Day just makes us reflect on that. So yes, that progress that was made back then, good to be proud of, but we should be looking backward. We should be looking forward from this point and say, okay, what do we got to do next to keep us on the path that we should be on?
I like that. I like that. And I want to get into something you mentioned before. You started saying with the colleges and the certain minority groups they weren't people to put in or didn't apply or whatnot. Do you think that apply? I work in the entertainment industry, of course. Do you think that applies to the entertainment industry as well? When they say women aren't being nominated, minorities aren't being nominated, do you think that's part of it? Do you think there should be an affirmative action kind of thing with that? Tell me a little bit about your opinions on that.
Well, it's an area I know less about, but I think it's about probably some of the same thing applies. Like in terms of being past a symbolic stage, right? So celebrating, whether it be gender or race, like the first, woman director nominated, or the Academy Awards for African Americans, and we sort of pat ourselves in the back as we say the first, the second, the third. But I would expect, and I would be interested in your opinion on that. That the real issue with that, again, is not celebrating the individual accomplishment. It's like, are we giving those voices the same access to the same type of resources and the same type of opportunities that we give to everybody? Are they giving fairly sort of an equal amount? And I'd imagine the answer is no. I'd imagine it's similar in terms of the cases that I gave that were more sort of economically or educationally oriented, which is, yeah, we kind of got the glass ceiling's broken, but the bigger issue of how do you really make it work for the multitudes, and that's just the symbolic few, is probably something that has deeper causes that we haven't addressed. But I'd be interested in your perspective on
And do you think there's ever going to be a time where it's all equal and fair for everybody, no matter what race, what gender, what sexual orientation, and whatnot, where everything is going to be equal? Or is it just going to be, a case by case basis or
Well, there's, there's the optimistic and the pessimistic side to that, right? And we'll never be a perfect society, right? And so, can you ever say there's ever going to be a time when we're 100% that way? I think the answer to that is no. We all bring our, you know, prejudices and biases, and I don't think they're going away. And there's humans that are involved. As whenever there's humans involved, there's sort of imperfection. But the promise of um, our founding, to get sort of dramatic, I guess around the inauguration, you're allowed to do that. But it never was, an equality of outcome. It was an equality of opportunity, and that's what was supposedly was promised. And there are things where those opportunities have not been equal. So going back to the example we are talking about the schools, um, uh, a child, I don't think anybody would argue with this. I think that a child should have an equal access to quality education as every other child, and that is just not the case, unfortunately, in the U.S. right now. So, if you come from an underprivileged area, you're probably coming from an underfunded school as well. So I think there's a lot of progress we can make, and a lot of things that we can look at like that, and will solve everything. No, I think we can be in a lot better place than we are right now if we really look at what the root causes are and take some steps to address them.
And now that Donald Trump is becoming president on Monday, what advice would you give him to make this happen? I mean, I know you said you're not,
Well, I know he wouldn't listen to it, so that'd be the first thing. But yeah, I mean, I would, just go back to that, mantra. It's like, so what is it? Like, what is it that is like holding us back, and can we go to the root causes and being a little bit pragmatic about it? If I were trying to convince the Trump administration, because they come from the side, that thinks it's, not an issue, that sort of looks out and says, well, we are close to a race blind society, and it's not a big issue to solve as people say there are. And I would disagree with that. But the argument I try to make with people from that side is that the kind of things we're talking about, in terms of equality of opportunity, don't just get defined by race. Talking about that school example again, um, that kids from low income areas, that applies regardless of race. So it's really saying, how are we helping the people fulfill the American dream who are on the lower part of the ladder right now? How do we people climb up that ladder? And applying it economically, saying anybody who does is from somewhere it's a a financially challenged area, we're going to help those schools more. That's not directing it necessarily to Hispanic, white, or African American school district. Now, the reality from statistics is that if you're from a minority community, you're more likely to be one of those. But it applies across the board, and I think a lot of Trump supporters would agree. I hate to speak for them. I'd say, a lot of the reasons they voted for Trump is because there is this large group of the white working class and middle class that does feel left behind by the economy, that does feel like they don't have the opportunities that their parents had. And taking on something like education and understanding the funding of schools helps them as much as it helps any minority. So I would hope that would be attractive to them, not based in a racial sort of benefit from a way, but more from like anybody who's coming from the sort of, I guess, underprivileged, regardless of race, needs more help. I hope that's something they'd agree with.
and you mentioned the American dream, and I want to ask you, what do you think it is in this day and age? I mean, I know back when people were coming to this country, they saw America, Statue of Liberty, and they're like, oh, the land of dreams, and thought they can come here, make their dreams come true, get the job, the 2.5 kids, the husband or wife. What do you think it is now in 2025?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it is. I think it's their. I don't. My vision of American dream is always a little bit simpler and applies now and then, which was the promise of America, not always fulfilled, but the promise was, you could rise to the level of your abilities, right? So, whether you're coming from, a heavy class system, which characterized, Europe in those early days, where it didn't matter if you were born into the right class, you had certain opportunities, and if you were born into the wrong class, no matter your talents and abilities, you sort of were expected to stay where you belong. And I think, that was the promise of America. You could come here. It wasn't necessarily that you would become rich or famous or anything, but it would be you could rise to the level of your ability to apply your talents and work hard. And it gets into another issue, but the tough thing with that part of that American dream right now is that, um, it doesn't bring all people along. So if you went back to and looked at a chart of economic growth and how it was distributed amongst the different classes of people, if you went back in the 70s even, and you saw like U.S. economically was doing better, you saw some benefit across all of the classes. So if the economy is up 10%, their incomes were generally up 10% across the board. Today, unfortunately, that's not the case. So when the economy does well, the top 10% tend to disproportionately benefit from it. And the bottom 10%, when the economy goes down, tend to disproportionately suffer from it. And what that means is that then there's now less mobility. So the American dream of being able to rise level your talents has become more difficult to achieve simply because if you're not someone who is like, again, the economy, the gains are coming from, people who, invest in stocks or invest in and have sort of capital, and they're the ones who sort of gain. It's not being reflected in, like, salary increases and things like that. So that upward mobility, that chance to be rise to the level of your talents, has become less easy to achieve than it has been in our history.
Let's shift gears a little bit because this has been a really heavy topic. I want to talk more about you. We know that you're an author. Tell us a little bit about the book.
So my book is provocatively titled "Confessions of a Racist," and it's called that really because, how we started our discussion. You were so kind to ask, but it's this thing about, are you a racist? And I think someone's going to test that. They're going to say, well, do you behave differently? Would you act differently? Would you do something differently if you're doing, with a minority group as opposed to a majority group? And if I had looked at the answer to that, I'd say, yeah, I had to honestly answer, yes, I do. But then I sort of give myself an excuse because I'm forced to. So, if I'm running a company, and I'm hiring people, I have to provide a record of how I've hired, by age, race, gender. Um, if you talked before, if I'm, working in the educational field and I'm, accepting my students, I also have to provide the government with a report of race and gender and things like that. So I'm I'm forced to act differently. I'm forced to think in terms of race, and so it was really, again, my yearning to try to say, well, so what do we do with that, and what's like the average person supposed to do, and how should they think about these issues in a way that hopefully is more productive than we sort of get from the extremes on both sides. So, we have the extreme right side saying there's, no problem, and, everything we should take off, remove any sort of, racially based sort of benefits program. And then you have the far left side who says, well, everybody who's white is inherently racist. And I disagree with both those views, and I just don't think those middle views are being more represented. So it was my small attempt to try to say, hey, there's another third way to be considered here, and maybe I can start a discussion that helps in a little bit to have a conversation that's just not the extremes talking to each
And again, I want to shift gears because this has been a very heavy conversation with lots of hot topics. I want to ask you, tell me something fun about yourself.
other. Oh, I don't know if I have one. Fun. I don't know. I guess um, uh, I'm a popcorn snob. I don't know if that's fun or not, but I love popcorn. If I insist that you have to pop it on the stove, and I have all my use avocado oil when you're cooking it because it has a higher burn point, so it cooks better. But then I use olive oil to season it because it tastes more like butter. So I'm very particular about my popcorn, and I have to admit I'm a bit of pride because I brought up three popcorn snob kids now too. So I'm carrying the tradition forward.
I like that. I like it. Now, are you able to eat movie theater popcorn or?
Well, I have to admit, I like popcorn so much. It's very hard to have bad popcorn, but I, I don't like it as much, I have to say. But I still buy the big bucket. So yeah, I'm guilty as charged.
Nice. Now, do you fill it with the extra butter and salt, or you just eat it as is?
I go as is. How about you? Do you add butter?
Of course, lots of butter, lots of salt, all the stuff I'm really not supposed to be eating. And now that I'm a personal trainer, so if my clients are watching
Oh,
this, my little secret, I like butter and salt on my popcorn, so I can't preach
yeah.
to you on that kind of stuff.
Well, that's what. Yeah, that's the standard joke is that, yeah. So yeah, popcorn is just a salt and butter delivery vehicle, right? So that I'm with you on that. Just it's crunchy salt and butter. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a great TV site too. What are you watching these days?
Oh boy, bounce around to sort of a bunch of things. But here's a big confession. I am a Law and Order addict. I know
Nice.
something about it. I think it's just so fun to watch, like over time, especially the original, the long series, and all the characters that sort of came through, and sort of all the things. So yeah, I can't get enough of Law and Order. So that's sort of old school. And then like everyone else, I guess bounce around between the different series and things like that. But yeah, that's my guilty pleasure is watching the reruns of Law and Order.
Nice. Well, they play them all day on USA Network, so you
Yeah,
get to watch it all the time. It's always playing on the gym, so
the Law and Order marathon, right? Yeah, yeah.
nice. And where can we follow you on social media so we can continue to follow this amazing career of yours? And if you write another book or anything like that, so how can we follow you?
Well, interestingly, I've done a ton of that independently, but I do have a website which is Confessions, um, uh, that I can share with you. Maybe you can sort of include later. But if people want to learn more about the book. There's a little bit more of that on my website, which I can forward to you.
I love it. Thank you so much. And Donald, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I can't wait to have you on again one day.
Thanks for the great questions. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. You have a safe weekend.
You too. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.